community assessment, and then come up with various adaptation options, and then finally develop the district adaptation plans. So we want to have the work of young people being centered in that process. And so that
Oh,
is why,
okay. So that's the work. Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's great. And so you're with the EPA. You're moving together
no,
with them?
yes, we have a representative from the
Okay.
EPA with us. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not the, though
Initially,
not
the
the
com
entire team, but usually
what
when
did you
you
say?
write,
What
not
did
the
you say?
entire not the entire EPA team.
Okay.
But when you write to Nana Moa, and then depending on the scope and then what you want to do, if he can't make it, then he will allow one of his team members to go with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's 10. A couple of participants are already joining. Let me welcome them. So thank you very much. I see about two more people on the call. Thank you for joining our webinar on partnerships for building a climate resilient Ghana. We're still waiting for more people to join, and then we can start the conversation. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I believe that there's power in collaboration. So if you're here, thank you for joining us, and you can actually share the word for more people to join the webinar as we wait to get a quorum. And also, if you're a participant here and you haven't already completed the pre-webinar survey, I kindly request that you do so. We'll be putting the link to the pre-webinar survey in the chat. So while we wait for more people to join, here is us kindly asking that you take a few minutes to complete that survey. It helps us to understand your expectations for this webinar. So please, if you haven't, we are attaching that now, and then you complete it for us. So that's in the chats now. The link to the pre-webinar survey is in the chats now. So if you haven't already completed that, because we already shared it via email, if you haven't, please just take a few minutes and then complete that for us as we wait for more people to join in. Thank you. If you've just joined us, thank you so much for taking time to be part of this webinar on building partnerships or building a climate resilient Ghana. We're waiting for a few more participants to join the call and then we can start. In the meantime, we appreciate the patience and we're hoping to start as soon as possible. And for participants who joined who haven't completed the pre-webinar survey, we're asking that you take a couple of minutes to complete the pre-webinar survey. We're sharing the link in the chat right now. So as we wait for more people to join in, please click the link and complete that survey. It helps us to understand your expectations for the webinar. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me officially welcome all of you to our 5th webinar under the Amplifying Gender Responsive Climate Action Through Social Media Engagement project. It is an initiative by GenSed, which is proudly supported by SIGRA Co-Water. Now, through this project, we are centering the voices of women, youth, and PWDs in climate discussions, actions, and decisions. And since August 21, we have used these sessions to raise awareness, share knowledge, and make sure that women, youth, and persons with disabilities are right at the center of Ghana's climate action story. Now, today's discussion is designed to build on the conversations we've had in previous sessions and will focus on exploring the power of partnerships and multi-stakeholder collaborations in securing the resilient Ghana that we want. Climate change is a complex issue, and we know that tackling it effectively requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. Now, Ghana is set to launch its resilience roadmap in the NAP in a few weeks. It is crucial that attention is given to how to harness different skills, expertise, and resources needed to ensure that we win the battle. How do we unlock the power of collaboration to ensure a climate resilient Ghana where everyone is protected? That is the main question we're seeking to answer with today's webinar. My name is Regina Bolibote. I work with GenSed, and I'm excited to be moderating the webinar. Before we begin, a few quick notes on the format. This webinar will last 90 minutes. We'll start with presentations from our speakers, follow that with a moderated discussion where I'll ask a few follow-up questions and some clarifications, and then we'll take your questions, comments, and reflections in the Q&A segment. As always, we want this to be engaging as possible, and so we're encouraging that you use the chatbot actively. Now let's meet our speakers for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Grace Ampoma Afrifa. She's the head of programs of Abantu for Development, a women's rights organization that works to promote gender responsiveness in policies in Ghana and Africa. Her expertise focuses on gender and governance, as well as on gender and climate change. She has spearheaded the design, implementation, and monitoring of various programs and projects aimed at policy influencing mainstreaming gender into climate change interventions within Ghana, the West African sub-region, and of course within Africa. She served as a speaker in national, regional, and international climate change dialogues, including those of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, the UN Women, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and several others. At the national level, she's contributed to mainstreaming gender into Ghana's nationally determined contributions. In addition, she's contributed extensively to the chapter on climate impact and adaptation assessment of Ghana's fourth national communication to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Let's now meet our second speaker, Patience Ejeku. She's a programs coordinator at Strategic Youth Network for Development in Ghana. She's working to ensure the voices of young people and children are heard and centered in Ghana's and the governance of Ghana's natural resources and environmental sector. She's a trained climate adaptation leader with over 5 years experience working with young people and communities to co-create and implement adaptation solutions that are community-led and enhance long-term resilience against climate impacts. In fact, currently she is on the field working to ensure that young people's voices are reflected in the adaptation plans of the various MMDAs. And we are pleased to have both ladies on the webinar. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking time off your busy schedules to be here.
Thank you very much, Regina, for the opportunity to also be part of this learning process.
Thank you.
So,
okay.
No,
Thank you,
go ahead, go
Regina, for the platform and also the opportunity to learn and share. I look forward to a very insightful session this morning.
Great. So we'll zoom straight into action and we'll hear first from Madam Grace Ampoma Afrifa. She will speak on the importance of cross-sector, multi-stakeholder collaboration and partnerships in advancing climate resilience, and also successful partnership models among government, private sector, civil society, and local communities in climate adaptation. Madam Grace, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much. To start with, I'll just give a brief on Abantu and what we do. I think that Regina has already said that Abantu is a women's rights organization that works on gender and governance and gender and climate change issues. Abantu has worked in Ghana for over 26 years. We host Ghana's Affirmative Action Law Coalition, the Women's Manifesto for Ghana, and the Gender Action on Climate Change for Equality and Sustainability. Now, I'll zoom in on the importance of collaboration and the importance of cross-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration and partnerships in advancing climate resilience. And I'll use a case study to give the practical importance of multi-stakeholder engagements and collaborations. So the first importance and relevance for multi-sectoral engagement when it comes to climate resilience is that the concept of climate resilience is multidimensional and multifaceted. Now, building resilience on the impact of climate change takes into consideration the socio-economic and political dimensions of any groups of people. So For any group of people who have been impacted upon by climate change, it would require that we take into consideration their social status, their economic capacities, as
Hello,
well
Madam
as their.
Grace. We seem to be having challenges with. Okay.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Regina? Hello? Was I breaking?
Madam Akuma, I can hear you. I don't know if probably Vijana is having some challenges. Can her team confirm if they can also hear
Madam
her?
Grace,
Or
can you
in,
hear
okay.
me?
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me,
Madam Grace,
Regina?
can
I
you hear
can hear
me?
you. I can hear you. Wow.
Okay, so we seem to be having some challenges with
Regina, can you hear me? Because the other speaker can hear me. Can you hear me?
Okay, so now we can hear you. Before we were having challenges hearing you because of, I think, poor quality of internet or something like that.
Oh, okay, because the other person said she could
Can you
hear
try
me.
again? Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
wow.
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Wow.
Madam Grace,
Okay.
is it possible for you to leave the meeting and join again? Let's see if that will solve the problem, because there's a lot of
Regina, we can hear her
interactions. We can't
clearly.
hear you.
Regina, we
properly.
can hear her clearly. So if you can also check your internet.
Is this better? Is this better? Oh. Is this better? Okay.
Hello, Regina. Please, can any of the participants hear me?
Hello, Patience. Hello.
Yes, madam, I can hear you. I
Okay.
think Virginia would have to check her internet. But it looks like she's the one we can't hear.
Regina, we can't hear you. Hello, Regina. This is anybody from Genset here? Benedicta, are you here? Hello, Benedicta.
Madam, okay.
Regina, are you back?
Yes, I can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay. All right. So I will just give a brief overview of what climate change is, climate resilience, and then we talk about the multi-sectorial collaboration and engagement. As we are all aware, climate change is the change in weather over a long period. Now, how this affects different groups of people is dependent on a number of factors. So, for example, how climate change will impact on women, different groups of women, women in the formal sector, women in the informal sector, young women, young men, the elderly, children. Climate change will impact on all these groups of people differently. In addition, their social status, their economic capacities, as well as their political status will have implications on how climate change affects these different groups of people, including persons with disabilities. Now, having laid that foundation, it is important that we understand that since climate change affects each of us differently, it's important that our quest to address the impacts of climate change takes into consideration these differentials. Otherwise, we may unconsciously exacerbate the impact of climate change on these groups of people unconsciously. It is therefore important that any intervention to ensure that these groups of people are resilient to the impacts of climate change takes into consideration the different aspects of the lives of these individuals. So it's important that any climate change intervention takes into consideration the social issues, the economic issues, the political issues, policy considerations, as well as the livelihoods of these individuals. So for any climate intervention that seeks to strengthen climate resilience to be effective, it must be multi-sectoral or multidimensional. Multidimensional in the sense that it brings on board sectors that will contribute to the economic empowerment of these groups of people, sectors that look at the social issues of these groups of people, sectors that look at developing research to give us data. Because without research, without evidence, without data, it is even impossible to be able to identify the groups of people and how they are impacted upon for us to even undertake the intervention to address the inequality or the impact that has been done there. So first, I'll start with academia. A lot of the times we, as civil society and as policymakers, do not collaborate with academia, but it's important that to ensure climate resilience of any groups of people, we engage with academia and we collaborate with academia. Academia, because they are able to undertake the research, give us the data and their recommendations to inform policy change and to influence policies, and to give civil society the direction in terms of the interventions that civil society will undertake. So having talked about academia, I will move to government policy. Based on the evidence gathered from the research from academia, this will inform government or policymakers on what needs to be changed or what needs to be influenced or impacted upon, what actions need to be taken. Then government will in turn modify its policies to ensure that it takes into cognizance the findings that academia has been able to achieve, or the findings that civil society that embarks on research have been able to undertake. Now, having concluded on policy and gathering evidence to inform policy, then we move to action. A lot of the action is either undertaken by government or civil society, and then the private sector, because, of course, the private sector is involved in a lot of industrialization, a lot of emissions. So it's important that they are also engaged so that they understand the dynamics and their own impacts on these different groups and how they can contribute to addressing the impacts that have resulted on these groups of people as a result of industrialization and their own emissions. So I will give a practical example of an intervention that we are currently undertaking and how we've brought on board these different stakeholders. I'll start with a program we call the Cocoa Life Program. Now, this is a program we undertake with a number of civil society organizations with support from the private sector. Now, because the private sector is a sector that deals in cocoa, and they take the cocoa seeds after they've been dried, they buy the cocoa. They're also interested in how the farmers that bring about this cocoa that they use for chocolate, biscuits, and all that, how their livelihoods are impacted upon, and the benefits that they may also be able to contribute. So this project is fully funded by the private sector. And civil society organizations actually implement these activities in cocoa growing communities. This project came about as a result of research that civil society and academia did together to come up with the findings. Now, based on the findings that we got on the impacts of climate change in cocoa growing communities, now the private sector is supporting civil society organizations and governments to implement interventions in cocoa growing communities to ensure that in the wake of erosion that is destroying the lands of cocoa farmers, they have additional livelihoods, income generating activities like snail rearing, like baking, like currently they've set up a factory in Bia West, which is taking care of liquid soap. They are making liquid soap from the cocoa pods. They are also producing bar soaps from the cocoa pods and pomade from the cocoa pods in Bia West District Assembly. And these are all interventions that are receiving support from the private sector. And civil society and the government is doing this collaboratively. So when I say civil society, I'm talking about Abantu for Development, I'm talking about Solidaridad, I'm talking about Child Rights International. And because this is a holistic intervention, we are not just looking at livelihoods, we're also looking at the gender dimensions. So Abantu comes in to ensure that women whose livelihoods have been curtailed as a result of climate change have additional livelihoods. Now, child rights come in to ensure that in cocoa growing communities, children are not going through child labor by providing labor for their parents or guardians who are involved in cocoa farming. Cocoa Board is a government institution, and Cocoa Board is also part of this intervention, as well as chaired. Now, what the government institutions bring on board is that because they work throughout the country, they ensure that the intervention is disseminated throughout the country in cocoa-growing communities. So where civil society organizations are not able to go to, the government institutions take up that mandate. And while they are undertaking their own mandate as government institutions to provide tools for cocoa farmers, what the private sector brings is added on. So cocoa farmers have an expanded inputs. So they provide inputs such as pruners, mechanized pruners that will help cocoa farmers to prune their cocoa. So you realize that this project, which is having a lot of impact in cocoa growing communities, it's multi-dimensional and multi-sectorial. We are bringing on board academia, civil society, government institutions, and the private sector. Private sector because they have, like I said, they have the bigger pockets and they are able to fund some of these interventions because they are into industrialization and they are also into emissions. So it's prudent that they also contribute to building the resilience of these groups of people. The final issue I will speak on is how women, children, and these groups of people have benefited from the intervention we are currently undertaking. Now, because of this support that we are rendering, children are currently, almost all children, 90 to 95% of children are in schools. Child labor has drastically reduced. We also have women who have gained economic power through the additional livelihoods that we have provided. Men cocoa farmers have also become conscious of ensuring that women who support them in their cocoa farms receive some form of economic power at the end of the day when the cocoa is sold. So this is a brief on a project we are currently embarking on and the usefulness of bringing together multi-sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Grace Ampoma Ifuifa, for that presentation on the importance of cross-sector multi-stakeholder collaboration, and also sharing with us the example of the current project being implemented where we're seeing different actors come together for a purpose. Let's move to our next speaker, Madam Patience Ejekum, and hear her reflections when it comes to challenges and opportunities in building inclusive multi-stakeholder adaptation frameworks and strategies to strengthen the coordination for the implementation of Ghana's National Adaptation Plan.
Thank you, Regina, and then a very big thank you to Madam Ampoma for really setting a very good background and giving me a very strong foundation to build on. And so, Regina, I appreciate if you can quickly project my slides. Some aspect of it has been covered, so I will just go through quickly so that we can have more time for the Q&A and also for the discussions. Okay, so while I wait for the slides to come up, I think Madam Poma has already explained essentially the cross-cutting nature of the impacts of climate change, how climate change affects different. Yes, thank you. So if you can go to the first slide, how climate change affects different social groups. And therefore, it's very important that anytime we are designing solutions, we have to look at the social and also the economic impacts of climate change to be able to co-create solutions that really matter to these social groups. In the first slide, I just gave a few examples of the key climate hazards and how it affects different sectors of the economy to bring home the fact that it's very important that anytime we are designing adaptation solutions, we ensure that we engage the various sectors. So, for example, if you look at rising temperatures and unpredictable rainfall patterns and its impact on agriculture, directly, we'll say is a Ministry of Agriculture, that has a mandate in supporting farmers to build resilience. But you also realize that when it comes to the early warning information services, you would require some knowledge or information from the Ghana Meteorological Agency. And then you also have to engage people from the Fisheries Ministry. So this is just to give an example of how, even though it's focusing on agriculture, we'll still need various ministries and various sectors coming to play to design solutions that really works well for them. Same can be applied to when it comes to flooding that is experienced around coastal communities. Usually you find that after flooding happens, you find NADMO coming to distribute some disaster relief items to these communities. But if we are to be proactive, and of course, through the development of these district adaptation plans, we have to ensure that we bring in traditional leaders. We have to ensure that we bring in churches. We have to ensure that we bring in youth groups. We have to ensure that we engage teachers even from various institutions. And then the fishmongers, the fisher folks, all within the community. As Regina mentioned earlier, so currently, as I'm speaking, I'm in Keta. We are working with some district assemblies in partnership with Environmental Protection Authority as they are developing their context-specific district adaptation plans to ensure that youth voices, because SYD, our focus mainly is working with young people and communities, so to ensure that we center youth voices in the development of these district adaptation plans, because we realize that to some extent, sometimes the youth groups are not part of these processes. So those are like some of the examples how flooding affects different groups and why it's important to ensure that we engage different social groups and different sectors. Okay, so with this slide, I just try to map out what you typically find in terms of the partnership ecosystem, not only in Ghana, but in Africa and then even globally. It's just the names of the institutions that will change in different countries, but usually they are more or less like the same. So in every country you go to, you find the key government ministries that are in charge of policy coordination, also planning and implementation. And in Ghana, if you check the new EPA Act, is the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology with its supporting authority now, which is the Environmental Protection Authority, that coordinates international climate change relations for the country. And so you realize that a lot of the reporting to the UNFCCC is done by the EPA office and endorsed by the minister at MEST. And so we talk about the nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, the BTRs, the national communications, and all those various reports. Can you please go back? The slide is not stable. So please go back to the partnership ecosystem slide. Okay, so yes, you find the ministry, MEST and also EPA leading when it comes to coordination around climate change policies, programs, and also implementation. And specifically when it comes to the National Adaptation Plan, it's a requirement that all countries mainstream adaptation planning in their various development processes. And we know that in the country, it is the NDPC that is in charge of long-term and medium-term planning. They are the ones that have the mandates to support the MMDAs to be able to develop their medium-term development plans, their annual plans, which is usually put together and coordinated into the coordinated long-term planning for the country. And so for the national adaptation planning, the NDPC, for example, plays a very critical role. And I already spoke about when it comes to access to climate information services, the Ghana Meteorological Agency also plays a very important role. So usually in the ecosystem where you find different projects, you find that at the government level, you have all of these key institutions playing a very important role when it comes to the policy coordination and also implementation front. And then we also have, very importantly, the development partners. Sometimes it's unfortunate, sometimes it's also unfortunate that we are kind of a donor dependent country. A lot of African countries are. And so you also find projects and partnership between the World Bank and then governments, even society organizations. You also have institutions like the UNDP, AFDB, EU, the GCF, when you're talking about the multilateral climate change financial institutions or mechanisms. And then you also find some private sector agencies like PEF, AGI, and now there are a lot of renewable energy firms and companies that are also coming up. And typically you find that their role is to lead innovation, provide investment to be able to scale solution. A very good example is what Madam Ampoma shared earlier about private sector providing support for government and civil society organizations to support some communities on alternative sources of livelihood. And then you also find civil society organizations, community-based organizations, and then various youth groups. So example is CASA. CASA to a large extent is recognized as a leading or the mother body of a lot of civil society organizations that are working around natural resource issues broadly, but then they also have the SDG 13 platform specifically for civil society organizations working on climate change issues. And then we have other organizations like Arocha, SYND, Send Ghana. And so typically you find, for example, SYND or Arocha having projects with Forestry Commission or with EPO or with MESTI that are implemented in communities. And then sometimes you also find projects by civil society organizations and other development partners like UNDP, the EU that are implementing in communities. And then sometimes you also have repurposing, when private sector repurposes their corporate social responsibility and they partner with civil society or community-based organizations to implement specific, whether water or agriculture projects in communities. Please, let's move to the next slide. So the next slide is, again, so just to give us some examples. There are so many of them. If you check the country's biennial transparency report, you see a lot of, even that one is not a good capture of everything that happens in the country. It's mostly focused on the government interventions or the big projects. But aside that, we have a lot of projects and programs by civil society organizations. And so I gave these few examples. For example, the Ghana Climate Innovation Center has become a very good model that a lot of people refer to when it comes to supporting SMEs, small medium enterprises, and also supporting innovators, climate change innovations, mostly by young people, and also I don't think they really have a cutoff age. And so it's more or less like an incubation program. They support young businesses to really develop their business model. And then sometimes they give them some kind of funding to be able to scale the work that they are doing. And at SYND, we also run a similar program called the Young Green Entrepreneurs Program. Currently, we are in our third cohort, and then we've trained over 300 young businesses. And so typically we realize that since 2020, when we're doing a lot of education on climate action, and we believe that young people are very useful resources, that when they are given the necessary support and the necessary guidance and training, will be able to contribute a lot. We are not just vulnerable, but we also have critical assets that can be harnessed to be able to contribute solutions. And so we realized that narrative was really making sense to a lot of young people, and identifying young people using coconut hacks to develop like briquettes, and people went into recycling. Some also went into agroecological farming, amongst others. And so the Young Green Entrepreneurs Program was kind of to create a space for them where together with the various stakeholders like the GRA, Register of Businesses, because it's one thing having a business idea, and it's another thing running a business to be able to thrive and to make profits in the ecosystem we find ourselves. So the support we try to give to the young people is to ensure that they are registered and really operating as recognized green businesses. And so anytime we go to conferences, just recently there were people from British Airways that we hosted in our office. We try to connect them to some of these opportunities for them to be able to benefit from support. And most of them have won a lot of grants across, also in Ghana and also different African countries. And then there's also the institutional framework for the developments of the National Adaptation Plan. I've seen that of other countries, and I think so far Ghana has somewhat a very good model. Because of the formation of the cross-sectorial policy working group, Madam Puma really elaborated, on this when she was giving a presentation. And Ghana, the cross-sectorial policy working group is the technical body that is mandated, that oversees all the technical work from the risk and vulnerability assessment to developing the various adaptation options and also for the implementation. And so at the CSPG level, you find people from the various ministries. You also find people from the MMDAs. You find civil society representatives. You find youth group representatives. And then so far, yes, you have the PWD, I think 2 groups. As for children, I'm not too sure about it. And so the CSPG really ensures that we have various representatives across different sectors being represented in the development of Ghana's National Adaptation Plan. And then you also have partnership or collaborations that usually exist between youth-led organizations, governments, academia, and communities. Example is this project we are running called the Youth Adaptation Connect and the Youth Adaptation Challenge. And so in 2020, when we heard that Ghana was developing the national adaptation plans, we engaged, and then we realized that there wasn't really a separate consideration for young people. But there was a consideration to, for example, develop a gender mainstreaming action or a gender engagement strategy. And IISD through the NAB Global also supported government to develop a private sector engagement strategy. And so we had a conversation with Dr. Enchi, which was well received. And together we looked for funding to develop a youth strategy. And so we got funding, and together with the EPA and also the University of Ghana Center for Climate and Sustainability Studies, we developed the youth strategy. And then from the findings, we realized that it's very important that if we are doing this at the national level alone, we might miss out on a lot of young people participating in what is happening at their district level. And so that is why since the beginning of the year, we go to different metropolitan districts and municipal assemblies where government is supporting them to develop their district adaptation plans, to work with them for them to understand where the assembly has gotten to, and also see the various avenues through which the young people can also be part of not just the development, but also the implementation. And then another one, which I've seen is gaining a lot of traction in a lot of the district assemblies, is the Bloomberg Youth Climate Fund. I think so far the KMA, Kumasi Metropolitan Assembly, it has been organizing for like 3 to 2 years now. So they receive funding a little bit big from Bloomberg Philanthropies. And then they release a call for like, I think 500, usually between $500 to $1,000 for young people with big ideas around climate change to apply and to get the little funding to implement. So KMA, Accra Metropolitan Assembly, and also Secondary Takoradi Metropolitan Assembly also runs this model. And I think it's a very good example of how through partnership we can also support the different social groups to implement climate change adaptation solutions. Next slide, please. I think I'll just have to run too quickly. Some of the gaps and challenges. I made this one the very first one because I'm very passionate about it. over the years, you realize that sometimes the people that represent various ministries, it's not even just ministries, sometimes even goes to civil society organizations, seem to become the sole host or knowledge house of all the information that is received in this process. So whether it's the NDC's process or the NAP process, or whether government has gotten funding to develop a new project, and usually the information is usually not institutionalized, such that even after the person has left the ministry or the organization, you'll be able to still have a very good record of it to track it. So this is like a very major challenge that I've also realized when it comes to strengthening partnerships and building long-term resilience. There's also weak coordinations among various ministries. Of course, if the information is centered usually in one department or even with one person, and after the person has left, it becomes very difficult in following up. And so it usually creates that kind of weak coordination among ministries and local government. And there's also the limited private sector engagement in adaptation projects. This is a much bigger conversation that is happening at the global level now, particularly when in COP30, we are looking at the adoption of a new climate change adaptation goal. Over the years, because unlike mitigation where the private sector will be able to calculate that I'm able, by implementing this project, I'm able to reduce my carbon emissions by this percentage, to be able to show leadership and also for compliance sake. Adaptation is usually more considered as a social good. And there's usually a thin line between adaptation and development. So you don't see a lot of private sector engaging in supporting adaptation projects. And so even at the global level, we're trying to see how we can advocate for more public financing to be made available for developing countries to kind of reduce the risk. And adaptation is also sometimes very high risk, to reduce the risk for a lot of private sector to also invest in adaptation. And also there's usually, limited access to finance, which you hear a lot in your engagements, whether as of finance, it cuts across finance, usually even between civil society organizations to take their project to the next level at the MMDA level and also at the national or the ministerial level. And there's also limited inclusion of women, youth, and other vulnerable groups. This was very much highlighted in the previous GenSed webinar that I participated in. And then you realize that even though SYND is leading a process to develop a youth strategy for adaptation to get a lot of young people to understand and be part of the process, there are still so many areas that we wouldn't be able to cover, sometimes because of financial challenges. And then if usually you don't find a lot of people deliberately asking that you have to involve young people in this process, they usually tend to be, to be left out. So there's also that gap when it comes to inclusion. And then very critically, the inability to sustain impacts beyond project cycles, which I believe is self-explanatory. Next slide, please. But these are some recommendations as to how we can strengthen partnerships when it comes to building resilience of people and also ecosystem against the impact of climate change. If I have to emphasize, we can't emphasize enough that climate change affects different groups. The impact levels are usually not the same, and so that is why different groups also have different responsibilities when it comes to their mandate to take action. But the key message is there's a need for all social groups, institutions to work together if we truly want to build long-term resilience against the impacts of climate change. No one group will be able to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. So there's a need for a very stronger partnership and collaboration. And so it's very important that we continue to strengthen the work of the NAP cross-sectorial policy working group. Now that the NAP is about to be launched, and then we'll be going into the implementation phase, I hope that group will still be maintained. And not only maintain, we ensure that we institutionalize the knowledge or information that the various representatives from the various ministries get being part of the NAP-CSPG, so that it becomes an institutional knowledge instead of just an information that one person has. It's also very important that districts and national plans speak to each other. This is a challenge that you find a lot. Sometimes we have assemblies with their medium-term development plans that is not really speaking to what's happening at the national level. So it's very important that if we want to really ensure that we build long-term resilience, we have districts plans speaking to that of national priorities. And then we also have to ensure we have inclusive financing. And then I'm giving this recommendation of repurposing corporate social responsibility, because sometimes we know that the MMDAs they don't have a lot of money, that's what they say, to be able to implement a lot of activities. And so you find NGOs and other institutions coming to support. But we also have businesses in these communities that, as part of their corporate social responsibility, comes up with different projects to support the communities. So I'm proposing like repurposing some of these the corporate social responsibilities. So if it's a water project, now you have to be cognizant of the risk assessments that has been done by the district assembly and know that this place you can't drill water there, or this place you can't build a school there. So let's continue to do these development projects, but we also have to be very mindful that they are climate resilient projects. And also, knowledge sharing is very important. And I highlighted the climate vulnerability portal that is being developed by Environmental Protection Authority as part of the NAP process, where they are supporting about 10 districts to be consistently updating the portal with climate information. So if there are climate events that happen within these metropolitan and district assemblies, and some of the actions that they are taking to be able to respond to these, so that if you want to implement a project, you'll be able to find all of those information, identify the gaps, and ensure that your project address to other needs and not just what is already being done by the assembly. And we also have to, ensure we encourage co-designing among communities, the private sector, and also the national ministries. And the next slide, I'm wrapping up, Regina. So this is just my vision of a resilient Ghana, where we truly have local assemblies, because I say that even if you live in East Legon, you're under a particular district or municipal or metropolitan assembly. So it's very important that we empower the local government to really take action when it comes to climate change adaptation, planning and implementation, and support young people to also drive innovation, have private sector confidence to be able to support some of these projects that have been developed by the metropolitan and district assemblies, and make sure that in all of this process, communities are part of it. And the last slide, which is my call to action, but it's also a statement that if we really want to ensure we build long-term resilience, no matter whoever is coming up with adaptation projects or climate smart projects, one thing is it's very important that you do an effective stakeholder analysis, because we've heard and we've seen a lot of stories of having about 2 to 3 organizations implementing projects, sometimes in one same community. They all have their reports of what they've done with the same community. And sometimes it makes it leads to over concentration of resources in areas, whilst other areas are left, untouched. So if we really want to ensure that we work together to build long-term resilience for our people and also ecosystem, it's very important that anytime you are coming up with your project, you do a very good analysis as to what is happening already in the communities and areas you want to work with, and that gradually we'll be able to ensure that we move, resources and projects to other untouched areas, so that they can also benefit from our community resilience projects as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Patience Ejikum. Also to you, Madam Grace Ampoma Afrifa, and both presentations have reinforced one message that climate change is a complex issue. It has far-reaching consequences, and no single entity possesses all the knowledge, skills, or even the funding needed to address it effectively. So thank you for the presentations. A few questions, follow-up questions before we invite comments and reflections and questions from our participants who have joined the meeting. And my first question will go to you, Madam Grace. So your presentation, you spoke about equity, social equity, which, yes, I agree that it should be a central consideration in all climate resilience efforts, ensuring that resilience measures do not exacerbate or amplify existing inequalities and that they actually promote social justice. Do you see that as the case in our efforts to build resilience as a country? Are we prioritizing social equity?
All right, thank you very much, Regina. I would say yes and no. Yes and no, because we have had a number of opportunities to strengthen the resilience of vulnerable groups, and the political will has not been very profound in these areas of strengthening the resilience of these vulnerable groups to ensure equity and social inclusion. Why do I say that? I will give some few examples of what we are doing to ensure and how we could have done better. Now, Ghana was one of the few 18 countries globally that integrated gender dimensions into its intended nationally determined contributions, what we called INDCs, now nationally determined contributions, what we call the GHNDCs. In view of that, we were given support for the readiness program to strengthen the gender dimensions of the NDCs. We had support to strengthen the resilience of vulnerable groups and strengthen the gender dimensions of our NDCs. But if you look at our NDC 2.0, you realize that it was not very profound. Our commitment to these vulnerable groups and socially unequal groups was not very strong. And that is why currently we are advocating for that in the NDC 3.0. You just have bits and pieces, oh, you know, we will engage women's groups, but when it comes to the practicality of it, it was not very profound or realized. If you look at the National Adaptation Program, which we fought extensively to ensure that women, young women, and persons with disabilities were included in the steering committee, you realize that realized a lot of impacts in the lives of these vulnerable groups, women, persons with disabilities, and young women. Because the advocacy was strong, there was political will and commitment to include these groups in the National Adaptation Project. So you realize that that saw a remarkable change in the lives of these vulnerable groups. They received support where erosion had taken over their lands. You know, a lot of the times women are the ones who own meager lands, small pieces of land. So when erosion occurs and takes over these lands, it renders us our livelihoods gone. But through the projects, women were able to have additional livelihood support programs, were able to give women efficient cook stoves and all of that to ensure that their resilience is strengthened. But when it came to the nationally determined contributions, we realized the gaps in terms of political will. So yes and no. Some areas we have been able to push and the advocacy has been able to ensure that vulnerable groups have been empowered in terms of their resilience. But in other areas, the political will is minimal. Thank you.
Very well. And there's a follow-up question to your response to this. You speak about political will. Does it have anything to do? And because we're speaking about different actors, government, private sector, so society, local communities, does it have anything to do with the politics of collaboration? Yes, we know that collaboration in and of itself should be benign, harmless, but then in reality, it's fraught with a lot of considerations. Sometimes we know there may be competing interests, and these interests could clash, and in the process, results in the voices of marginalized communities often being drowned out by more powerful actors. Do you see that playing out? And if yes, how do we overcome that challenge as a country as far as reaping the benefits of multi stakeholder collaboration is concerned?
Thank you, Regina. When I say, I mean, of course, we're talking about multi stakeholders, but I am focusing mainly on government. Currently, patients did a stakeholder mapping, and we saw that the Ministry of Environment, through the Environmental Protection Authority, is responsible for climate issues. Currently, there's a ministry on climate change the um, at the Flagstaff House. That is stationed at the Flagstaff House at the presidency, a ministry on climate change. The expanded view of a ministry on climate change does not necessarily state that there's political will in terms of mitigating the impacts of climate change or rendering these vulnerable groups climate resilience. We already had a ministry that was working on these issues. What it actually does is the challenge that patients brought up, the silos, working in silos. So you'd realize that in as much as we have the Ministry of Science, Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and we now have a Ministry of Climate Change. Now, you would realize that there are issues that will go to the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology, because that's the ministry we are most familiar with in terms of climate change issues. And there are issues that will go to the Ministry of Climate Change because it is an upcoming ministry that is spearheading climate change issues. So you'd eventually now realize that there's much more division than collaboration.
Mm.
So it is also going to, how do I call it? Reduce the resources that we could have used for strengthening the resilience of these vulnerable groups. So we are expanding sectors rather than ensuring that we are mainstreaming and we are collaborating the already existing multi sectors. So the meager resources we have are supposed to actually ensure and strengthen our climate resilience, but we are expanding sectors and not collaborating. So these are some of the challenges that we see in terms of the political will of our government. How is the government ensuring that the various sectors that we already have are strengthening the resilience of vulnerable groups? How is it ensuring that the meager resources we have are not further expanded to take care of what we call technocrats, but rather it is benefiting the local communities that are being affected? Because how much does it cost to actually set up another ministry? Those funds could actually have been used to strengthen the resilience and mitigate some ongoing emissions somewhere. But we're expanding the ministries. How are we collaborating? How is even the now Ministry of Climate Change collaborating with the Ministry of Environment? You would ask the Minister for Climate Change certain questions and people say, I need to refer this to the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology. So these are the challenges that we see. So when I say political will, categorically I'm talking about the government and its role in terms of committing to the resilience of these vulnerable groups and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Let me come to you, Madam Patience. And I think it's related to the response that Madam Grace is just giving about not just the quantity, but focusing on the quality so that actions, decisions, and measures actually benefit those for whom they're intended for. Now, how can we ensure that information and progress from the national level coordination filter down effectively to the regions and the districts? And I see, and I'm asking this to you because you mentioned in your presentation the disconnect between the district assembly adaptation plans and then the national adaptation framework, for instance.
Thank you, Regina. I'd rather say that now the development of the district adaptation plan is an attempt to kind of address the issue of sometimes misalignment between the priorities of the district assemblies and also that of the national government, as you find in the medium-term development plans and the country's long-term strategic planning documents. And so what the EPA is trying to do now is to ensure that now that the downscaled assessment has been done, and then there's a fair idea as to the national priorities across the various sectors, they are extending the work to some of the district assemblies. And even we have about 261 to around 261 or 265 MMDAs. But this round of funding is only able to support about 10 to 15 MMDAs to be able to develop their district adaptation plans. But if I'm to go to your first question of how do we institutionalize information and knowledge, which is a very major concern to me, I would say that we should just strengthen the mechanisms that already exist to work. Because if you look at the national planning process, so you have the NDPC that coordinates. We also have the RCCs, the regional coordinating councils. Then you come to the various MMDAs, because the expectation is that the MMDAs are like the government in the local assembly, so they form the local government, right? So whatever priorities, whether it is in the northern region, Ashanti region, Eastern region, whatsoever, if you come to Keta, the assembly should have a very good knowledge and information as to whatever that is happening within Keta, to be able to report through their medium-term development plans and also their annual plans, so that the regional coordinating councils also have a very good idea as to whatever is happening, within their regions, and then it's passed to the NDP, the Ministry of Local Government, and also the NDPC. So if we really allow these systems and mechanisms to work, and we don't have individuals that represent these institutions at various meetings and are not able to report back to ensure that the knowledge or the information that the individual received is institutionalized, we'll continue to have these cycles. Because there are some times that you write letter, because you go to meetings, you meet this person from this ministry or from this assembly, and then you write a letter to follow up on the engagements, and then you either get, oh, I don't know about it, the person didn't tell us there's any of this project happening, or the person has been transferred to either another assembly or another ministry, and so the institution does not have a very good record as to what is happening. I haven't worked at the local assembly or a government before, but these are signs, or these are symptoms of some of these challenges that we are seeing. And so that is why my recommendation, so for example, a model that we have operated at S1, even though it's like a small organization, but has really worked well for us, is reporting whoever is sent to represent the organization at any meeting or becomes a lead for any project, has to make sure that on Mondays when we are having our weekly meetings, you tell us every place you went to, why you went there, why that meeting you attended and the next steps from that meeting is very important or will support the growth of the organization, and what should we look out for next. And so you realize that when you come to our organization, even if I don't directly work on energy, I have some idea of what is happening at the national level because the energy project lead was able to report back. So the knowledge and the information doesn't only stay with the person who attended that meeting. So I know that the government's system is a bit more complicated than that of an NGO, but I believe that these are some of the things that practically, if they're able to be able to curtail some of these issues of information not being decentralized to the local government level.
Very well. And just because you are speaking about institutionalizing climate knowledge, I think I should refer this question that's in the chat from one of our participants to you. It's from AJ. Says, I'd like to know how partnerships can help strengthen the capacity of MDAs and MMDAs to institutionalize climate knowledge and ensure continuity of actions beyond the lifespan of individual projects.
Thank you. AJ, I think it kind of relates or ties into the submission I just made, but also an example or a model that if we promote, I believe will work very well. For example, is the climate vulnerability portal. Because what's that happening is that is looking at the bottom up, and also it's like a bottom up and a top down approach. So for the climate vulnerability portal, the idea is that we'll be able to have information as to what is happening at the various MMD levels. So you'll be able to access information from the MMDs and also what is happening at the country level. So they are creating back ends where the MMDs will be able to fill in or be able to submit data and information as to what's happening, and then the various ministries, agri, water and sanitation, all of them will also be able to have someone who like continuously reports on the activities and the engagements that they are having when it comes to adaptation. I think so far it's adaptation. I don't think it covers mitigation activities and projects. So if you're able to implement this very well, then we wouldn't necessarily be chasing the people who are doing the reporting, but it will become like an institutional knowledge. So if I go to we just came from STMA, and STMA with the support from POMSA, Cabinet of Mayors, is implementing some infrastructure projects, right? But there's a lead person that usually you deal with, or the COMSA team deals with, or goes for meetings in Accra and different countries, particularly when it comes to building climate resilient infrastructure. But if you're able to have very accurate report or information from the engagements of this project on the climate vulnerability portal, then it has become information or yes, a knowledge for STMA and not just for an individual. So for me, I believe the challenge is when it stays with an individual and the institution doesn't have a very good record of it. So if we are really able to implement this climate vulnerability portal well to ensure that we have very accurate information, and then MMDAs will be able to track or follow what is happening at the national level, and then the ministries will also be able to track what is happening at the MMDA level.
Very well. Thank you so much. Let me come to you, Madam Grace. We know that when we're talking about collaborations and partnerships, we can't leave out local communities because they're central. Now, in this conversation, how can partnerships between local communities and national level actors be structured so that there's more accountability and then also sustainability?
Right. Thank you, Regina. I think that currently there's structure. What we have is structure. What we don't have is actual implementation of the existing structures. So currently, district assemblies are developing their medium-term development plans as part of the requirements from NDPC. And these medium-term development plans have climate change components. They have indicators that they are supposed to develop programs that will address climate change and all of that. What we need is to monitor how these medium-term development plans are, number one, funded and actually implemented at the district and community levels. So the national level's responsibility in ensuring that the medium-term development plans and action plans respond to the requirements of the NDPC. They provide the resources that are required in a timely manner. So sometimes you have the district assemblies complain that the funds don't come in timely. By the time the funds come in, it's either that the year is about to end and it's difficult to implement the activities that they've outlined. So at the national level must provide the required resources for district assemblies and communities to undertake the programs and actions that they've spelled out to undertake in their medium-term development plans, and also to monitor the activities that are implemented, the results that emanate from these activities, and also to have periodic engagements between the national, the regional, and then the districts and the communities, so that the local, regional, and then the communities are informed. I think that Patience, in talking about the learning, talked about some of these to ensure that information is disseminated from the national to the regional to the district and then to communities. So periodic engagements between the national, the regional, and then the districts and the communities that are involved is also very important. A lot of the times we don't see that collaboration and those engagements. Once in a while, you'll see the ministry or EPA calling on the district assemblies, but these are not often. These should be made often to ensure that there's information that is trickling down from the national to the local level. Thank you.
On the subject of funding, I'll come to you, Patience. How can we incentivize private sector funding into adaptation projects?
Thank you, Regina. That's a big conversation. And I remember just few months back, we had a multi-stakeholder dialogue on adaptation financing in Ghana, where we brought together the representatives from AGI, from the Private Enterprise Federation, banks, and various insurance bodies. Because we saw that, okay, again, I mentioned earlier about repurposing corporate social responsibility or financing for corporate social responsibility. And then we saw that that can be like a good medium to be able to get the companies that operate within the various MMDAs to support the climate adaptation components in the medium-term development plans, or also directly if that assembly has been supported to develop their district adaptation plans, then they can do that. But it's also very tricky. The narrative of a lot of private sector financing for adaptation is tricky at the international level because of the politics, because private sector is more profit driven than social empowerment driven, right? And so there's even the argument that even if you are going to advocate for private sector financing to come into adaptation, we still would need a lot of public financing from developed to developing countries to kind of de-risk the sectors and the systems to be able to ensure private sector comes into adaptation financing. But there's a model, for example, that we are running with Prudential Life Insurance. So Prudential Life Insurance, as part of their ESG, reached out to us on their intent to go into like mangrove restoration, because we know mangroves helps to build the resilience of communities and can also serve as a carbon sequestration and natural ecosystem-based adaptation. And so we became like the technical partners for the implementation of that project. And together with the Forestry Commission division in Ada, we are implementing that project for the last 2 to 3 years. So that is what I mean by repurposing the ESG and also the corporate social responsibility requirement of private sector. So if the companies wants to support the communities to either build a classroom block, then they reach out to the assembly. The assembly can look at based on their vulnerability assessments that now you can't only build classroom blocks, because we have the key climate hazards probably in our communities, increasing temperatures that leads to heat that affects the students when class is in session, or sometimes flooding. And so that also determines where you are going to put up the structure, the kind of structure you are going to put up. So it's the same development, community development projects that a private organization will do, but we have to make sure that this time is going to be climate resilient. Then the district assembly can also report as part of the activities that they've also received support from this organization to be able to ensure that they put up resilient infrastructure. If it's about water projects, I think the same thing kind of applies. If it's about agriculture, building the capacity of smallholder farmers to go into agroecological farming to increase their resilience to the impact of climate change. If it's about distributing, drought tolerant or drought resistant seedlings, then the private companies or organizations can also go into some of these specific activities and support the MMDAs to be able to do so.
Thank you very much, Patience. And we're just preparing to wrap up the conversation. Let me just say to our participants, we have put in the chat the link for a post-webinar survey. We entreat all of you to take a few minutes to complete that survey for us. It's for the purposes of improving future webinars. Also in the chat, we do have a solidarity message of a sort from Dr. Joseph Wimako. He's the Executive Director of the Human Rights Reporters Ghana and Steering Committee member of the Ghana Society Organizations Platform on SDGs. He says it is a pleasure to join this all-important call to dialogue on a pressing issue of this magnitude affecting not only women, but all of us globally. Wishing you all a fruitful deliberation. So that's it from Dr. Joseph Wimako. I have a question that I'm going to throw to both of you, both speakers, and I think we can have that as our final question before we wrap up the webinar. It's about strengthening coordination for the implementation of the NAP, which is set to be launched. And I'll come to you, Madam Grace Ampomah Afrifa. What concrete mechanisms, whether it's platforms, frameworks, can we use to improve the coordination for the implementation of this important roadmap?
All right, thank you, Regina. I think that the implementation of the NAPs presents us an opportunity to help build coordination. And what effective mechanisms we can employ is that we can leverage on the expertise and experiences of various sectors that are intertwined or that have a role to play in terms of climate change issues. We can coordinate with sector players such as the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Agri, Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, Ministry of Environment. We can also leverage on the expertise of civil society. And lots of the times you realize that there's that de-link between government and civil society. Over time, we have tried to ensure that civil society and government collaborate. What we can do in the implementation of the NAPS is to ensure that there's a strong collaboration between civil society and government to ensure that the knowledge and experience that civil society have is leveraged upon to strengthen the effectiveness of the implementation of the NAPS. This would even help us to gain attraction from some development partners that civil society also work with to expand the resources available for the implementation of the NAPS. This will also help us strengthen information sharing and learning within the implementation of the NAPS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Patience, your take on that question. You've already mentioned the cross-sectoral group and hoping that it is maintained during the implementation of the NAP. But beyond that, what else can work to ensure there's effective coordination for the successful implementation of the NAP?
Well, Regina, I was just really going to re-emphasize on the same point. Because if you see the institutional arrangements as we have it in the NAPS documents for the that will like oversee the implementation of the NAPS, I'm happy if it's not very different from what already exists in the country when it comes to long-term development planning. And that is the objective, one of the core objectives of national adaptation planning, to ensure that national adaptation planning is mainstreamed, because especially for developing countries, there's usually a thin line between development and adaptation planning. And so honestly, I would just say let the systems work as they should. And then also civil society organizations should also play their very important, I would say, watchdog role. And then also the media. It's very important that we ensure that these two institutions work together. And then where information or action is not reaching local communities and they are not benefiting as they ought to, we should be able to bring that to the attention of the various key ministries responsible for the implementation of these NAPS. But I really can't answer the question without re-emphasizing the point that we should allow the institutional mechanisms that have been arranged for the implementation of the NAPS to work. And then we should also institutionalize knowledge. Information and knowledge in this process of implementation shouldn't only be kept with individuals, but we should ensure that the institutions have very good records of it, so that whether CSOs, CBOs, or development partners go to any of these institutions and then they want to implement projects, the institutions can provide them with what is already being done so that they can look at other areas that haven't been captured.
Thank you very much. I'll take your closing remarks now. 30 seconds for both of you. You can start, Madam Patience, and then Madam Grace will conclude. Your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Regina, and all your listeners. My closing remarks is that climate change affects different groups differently, but we all know that everybody's affected. And so different groups also have different responsibilities. And that is why it's very important that we work together, civil society, CBOs, academia, media, government, everybody works together to ensure that we are able to come up with projects and programs, co-design it with communities to ensure long-term resilience of not just the people, but also the ecosystem that makes sure that people have good water, good air to breathe, and also good food to eat.
Thank you, Madam Grace Ampoma. Your closing remarks.
Thank you, Jenset, for putting this together. Thank you, Regina, for hosting us. My closing remarks is that we all have a role to play, not just the stakeholders, not just the sectors, but also I will focus on the communities, the vulnerable groups that we've talked about. We all have a role to play in ensuring that we are resilient to climate impacts, because whether we like it or not, the impacts are not going anywhere. So it's important that when opportunities come and when resources are provided, we are well committed to these opportunities to be able to strengthen our own resilience, and so that we are able to withstand the impacts of climate change. I will also endeavor to mention that it's important that in every climate intervention that we seek to produce, we should ensure that we disaggregate the data to ensure that vulnerable groups are empowered and that the interventions do not further exacerbate their plight, but that they are part of the design, the implementation, and the monitoring phase of our interventions. That we all work together, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, civil society, and patients, as mentioned, the media, as well as all the vulnerable groups that we have outlined, persons with disabilities, are not also left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Grace Ampoma Afrifa. She is the head of programs at Abantu for Development, extensive experience in leading projects on climate change with a focus on gender. Also, thank you to you, Madam Patience Ejekum, the programs coordinator at Strategic Youth Network for Development in Ghana. Both of you have been refreshing to listen to, and we've appreciated the insightful conversations we've had with you today. Thank you so much for being on the webinar. And to our participants, we want to thank you greatly for the time you've taken to be part of this conversation. For those who sent in questions, thank you so much for being active during the webinar. And as a closing remark, I'd say that, like they have said, our presenters, our guest speakers, climate change affects all of us. It is our business, all of us. So everybody has a role to play in ensuring that Ghana actually wins this battle and ensuring that Ghana is climate resilient. Whether you're a student, a policymaker, an advocate, you have a role to play. Let's all take those roles seriously. Remember that climate change is an ongoing, evolving problem, and we need to be continuously involved in finding solutions that work. Thank you once again for joining our webinar, and we hope to see you in our final session next week. My name is Regina Bote. I work with Genset, and on behalf of Genset, all of us here, thank you so much. Have a great Tuesday and enjoy the rest of the week.